Let's start as usual at 9:05, and hopefully we'll have slightly more people. I would say that's a good number in general, but smaller than we usually have. So let's wait a bit more.
Sao vì sao còn một số cái code nó là chậm ta? Những cái báo cáo chuẩn của SAP nó chậm lắm.
All right, um, it's time to start. Um, Good morning. Good morning again. Today is the third day of our 5-day train course. This day is very funny and interesting. So I hope you're gonna like it. And let's get started. And by the way, why this day will be even more funny because today I enable subtitles, and sometimes it's very interesting how to recognize my speech. And if you read the subtitles, oh, um, you may learn new words, and I sometimes learn new words after my speech. But generally speaking, the recognition is pretty fine, but sometimes it just changed the meaning completely. Uh, all right. So today we have the third day, and at least the first half of the day will be more convenient for developers, targeted for developers, for not for developers, but for those who has some experience in development and DevOps. Because in the first session, we're gonna talk about application protection, application security. But I hope by the end of the session we'll be on the same page, at least from the perspective of the Azure features that can help us to protect applications. So in the first part, we're going to talk about application security. In the second session, we're going to cover storage and databases, how to configure access to storage, how to configure database security technologies.
Để đổi một số nữa coi.
So, our schedule, as usual, we have a session, like a theory, that's my demo most of the time. Then we have a break, labs. Today we'll have one lab, but this lab will be quite large, quite huge. So we'll spend a lot of time on only one lab. Then session number 2, labs. So the same as yesterday. All right. So let's get started. So in the first session, and the first topic of the first session is Key Vault. Key Vault. What Key Vault is all about in general. Let me first tell you why do you need Key Vault, and then we're gonna cover what it has. Can you imagine that you have an application? An application contains secrets. The most common secret that almost every application has, classically, is the connectivity to database. So application use database. To connect to database, application must have a connection string with username, with password, and it was always tricky to store this information securely. For example, where I can store the information about the database in the application, I can hard code in the application code, which was the less flexible way. And you may put username and password there inside of the code. But what if you change the password for the database? You need to rebuild the application. Probably it's not super good idea. Another one more popular is to use different config files where we can store those values, but it's not secure. Not secure, because if anyone has access to the file system, they can read those values like username and password and connect to the database. So if I'm attack as an attacker, or even the regular user, just read this config file, I can find what is the username, what is the password, and just connect to the database. So it's always pain in the neck to store the secrets like this. And of course, Key Vault can help us with it to store it securely, to store those values. Another example but maybe an example, is encryption keys. Where to store encryption key? Do you remember yesterday we talked about Azure Disk Encryption, and I told you that we use Key Vault to store keys. If we compare with BitLocker that we have on-prem, where BitLocker stores the key in TPM, but in Azure we don't have TPM. So where to store keys? Key Vault may help us. And the third example that how Key Vault can help us: certificates. Have you ever saw, or maybe you struggle from this, certificate that expire or near to expire, and you need to manage life cycle of all of those certificates? Or have you ever seen that you just try to access the website, but it says, "Hey, sorry, but certificate expired," and owners of this of this resource, they just miss the moment when they need to when they need to renew the certificate. Maybe you had this experience for your company, or you just your user. So it's always painful to manage all those certificates. Key Vault can handle all of those three problems: store keys, secrets, and certificates, and help you to manage their life cycle. So that's a Key Vault. That help you to store those entities securely. Key Vault may store them in the software vault, in the software with software protection, or it can even store it with HSM, which is the hardware protection of secrets. In that case, if you have a requirement to use HSM because of the compliance regulations, you must use HSM. It's possible to use Key Vault for this as well. What is important? It's not intended to store user passwords. It is not a database for user passwords from different resources, from the social networks, whatever. It is the vault for the passwords, for the secrets keys that are maybe used centrally. It is not about user specific passwords. If a user wants to store their password securely, the user may install password manager. So Key Vault is not a password manager. Key Vault that's the storage for some application related settings. And it has two tiers: standard and premium. The difference is standard can work with software protection, premium can work with software and hardware protection. All right, and when we're talking about Key Vault, first thing that we need to do, we need to create Key Vault, and I will show to you how to do it soon. And after we create the Key Vault, we need to configure access policy, access in general to Key Vault. And nowadays, the current model, how can we access Key Vault, is divided into two pieces. First one is Key Vault management, and the second one is Key Vault data. And the management and data, they should be configured differently in different places. So if I want to configure management, I must configure airbag. And if I want to configure data access, I must configure access policy. All right, from here, let me jump to demo. Let's create a new Key Vault. Oh, I removed that. Sorry, just want to save some money. Let's get a new resource group. Each day I remove a resource group with all of the resources. So let me create this group again. All right, so let's create a key vault. Let's call it like this. I don't know if it will work. Yeah, that works. That in the West Europe. I'm gonna choose premium tier. And you should know about some of the configurations that we have when we create a key vault. First of all, self-delete. Previously, we could enable or disable self-delete. What is self-delete? Self-delete is like a recycle bin. When you want to remove the secret or key, it will not be removed immediately. It will be placed in the removal items. So you may restore it. So it's some sort of recycle bin. Previously, you can enable that or disable. Now, it is not possible to disable that when you create, so it must be enabled by default. You can still disable that for existing key vaults that you already have pre-created, like maybe you had before, but it will be deprecated by the end of the year. So by the end of the year, even existing key vaults will not have the way to disable self-delete. So self-delete, like recycle bin, it's enabled by default. And when you remove the keys or secrets, you may say for how long those removed items will be stored before they will be purged. Minimum amount of days is 7. Let's try 5. No, minimum is 7. And the maximum is 90. From 7 to 90, it will be retained. And the last one is purge protection. This thing you still can enable or disable. What purge protection is? Purge, that's the way how can you remove item from the removed item. Purge item from the removed. For example, I have self-delete. I remove the key or secret, and according to my configuration, it will be stored, retained for 7 days before removed. What if I want to force the removal? What if I want to completely remove this key without waiting for 7 days or whatever it may be? What I can do, I can purge. And what you can do, you can enable purge protection if you don't want your users to purge. Not users, of course, but administrators who manage Key Vault. You may protect not manage Key Vault, who manage Key Vault keys or secrets. You may protect those keys and secrets from purge. So admins must wait the whole period, like 7 days in my case, before key will be completely removed. So it's not possible to remove it manually if we enable purge protection. All right, so let me click create. Click create. So it shouldn't take long. Let's wait a few seconds. Maybe not a few seconds. Slightly longer than expected. But still, it should be quite. Oh, here we go. So I open the Key Vault. And now we have the Key Vault. Let's take a look on the Key Vault access, because that's the quite long topic. So that's the reason why I first show you a couple of slides, then give you a demo, and after this, I'm gonna continue to show you slides, and then we'll give you additional demos. So I have the Key Vault, and the first thing that I can do here is to configure access. So let's take a look on the classic model, which you can find on the exam. Classic model, that how we configure access to Key Vault. So in the classic model, configuration is divided into 2 pieces. First one is airbag, where we manage the actual Key Vault operations, and Key Vault access policy, when we tell who can manage keys and actual keys and secrets. So let's take a look on both of those. So according to classic model, according to classic model, I can go to IAM, Identity Access Management, and I can click Add Roles and Add Role Assignment. And if I look at, if I show all of the roles, and if I show all the roles, I can find Key Vault Contributor, which is only one role that's not in the preview. So if I want to manage Key Vault, I must provide Key Vault Contributor access for the user. So Key Vault Contributor, and choose the user. So what Key Vault Contributor can do? Let me just click roles, find Key Vault Contributor, permissions, Key Vault, and look here. So I can do a lot with Key Vault itself. But if I scroll down, and look here, it's management, so I can do a lot with management. But if I scroll down, I have no permissions to work with data. So cannot work with certificate, with keys, secrets. So all of those operations that I may have with alt-click key, it's like a backup key, create key, encrypt key, decrypt key, or even purge. I cannot do anything with that. The same with secrets, by the way. If I click on secret, I cannot do anything with secrets if I have this airbag permission. So only management, only the management of Key Vault itself. So if I want to manage Key Vault, I must configure airbag according to the classic model. That's important. And also according to the classic model, if I want to configure access for actual keys and secrets, I must configure Key Vault access policy. So let's jump to access policy. And here I can see that the user who created the Key Vault has permissions. But if I want to I'll allow somebody else to use those keys and secrets, I must add the access policy. So let's add access policy. I can also find a template. So sometimes I can configure access based on template. By the way, one of the examples when we must use template is backup. If you want to backup keys with Azure Backup Service, you must use the template because it will use principle for backup principle. Because if I remember correct, you cannot find it manually. Let me just double check. Oh no, I can do it manually. You can. So what you can do here in access policy, you can say, all right, so I want to allow access to key. So get keys, list keys, create keys, create keys. Also secrets, get, list, and set secrets. So that's the operations that somebody will have. Somebody will have with keys and secrets. So now I need to check. I need to choose who will have access to those operations. Let's find some users. Let's say JDO, and now I can choose JDO user. But in the real world, most of the time, it won't be only people, users, it will be applications, because application must have permission to access secrets and keys. So in the real world, it will be applications. So principal for the applications. Please mute your microphone. I don't know who's doing that, but please do it. Please mute your microphone. So principal. A principal for user or for the application. Application principles we'll see soon, but let me just find up what applications I might have. VS. Yeah. Azure DNS. Looks like it's a user. I don't have applications here. Anyway, I'm gonna check what applications I have. At least I don't remember the name. So you add the application here, but let me choose the user, like BI user. Click select, and now if I click add, so BI user will have permissions to manage manage keys and not the manage, but create and list and open keys and secrets. By the way, if I want to allow access to Key Vault, somebody which doesn't have principal, for example, Azure Disk Encryption. That's what we had yesterday. Azure Disk Encryption doesn't have principal. Disk doesn't have principal. So we can just check the box here and just to allow Azure Disk Encryption to access Key Vault. Also, we can do it for during virtual machine deployment. So before deployment, virtual machine doesn't have principal, or in general in a resource management template, we can specify some values and we can protect them in the Key Vault. For example, what maybe you create your own template, and in your template you don't want to hard code the value. You want to store those values in the Key Vault, and then from the template you may access Key Vault and access those values. All right, so that's a classic model. But if you look close, you may find here in the permission model, we have the second model, which is in preview now. So the things that in preview you will not find on the exam, but probably this new model will go out of preview and it will be released. So what the new model is all about? New model. Let me switch to that. Look here. Now, the access policy, all of the configurations that I configured are disappear. And what I can do, I can configure both layers, management and data layers, using Airbag. So if I switch to this new model, Azure role-based access control model, so I can configure management and data with Airbag. And for this, I have multiple roles. Look here. Key Vault Administrator, Key Vault Certificates Officer, Crypto Officer, Crypto Service Encryption, and so on. So I have multiple roles. And by the way, I can also create custom role where I can more granular assign permissions that I want. Let me click Key Vault Crypto User and click Permissions with Key Vault. And look here. So according to this role, I cannot do anything on the management layer, but permissions on the key on the data for the key. So I'll click here and look. I can read keys, I can backup keys, decrypt keys, encrypt keys. So I can I can work with keys, and that's the airbag role. Let's see some other roles. Let's say I want to see Key Vault administrator permissions. This guy has access on the management layer and a lot of access on the data layer. So the new model, according to the new model, you can have the role that will allow you to configure the management and data as well. So that's a new model, and you already can use that. Now it's in preview, but you can use that already. All right, so let's move on from here, from Key Vault access.
Mấy doanh nghiệp ở lên được kìa, thấy cái gì được kìa.
So from here,
I would request everyone to please mute yourself. This is a long participation list over here. I would request everyone to please keep yourself on mute. Thank you.
Thank you. Every time a new person connects, I help him to mute the microphone. So let's take a look at one of the examples related to role management. You may find it on, that's about classic model, by the way. That's about classic model. You may find this table on the Microsoft website. The question, can we use Azure Key Vault for on-premise system? Generally speaking, yes, you can. You can. If on-premises system has access to the internet, then yes, you can. I'm going to show you how to do it. And by the way, I will show you the Key Vault for my on-prem, so you're going to see that. Oh, by the way, let me run my virtual machine. So this table, as you can see, this table you may find on the Microsoft website. According to this table, it's recommended to use to create your own roles. Soon, Microsoft will have roles for management and keys, but for the classic model, for the classic permission model, it was recommended to create your own roles in your company. It's not a technical approach. That means that you should have the role in your company on paper. And so, for example, we can say we have the developers. For developers, we will allow them to manage Key Vault. Or we may have security team, and security team must manage the Key Vault and also must have some permissions to manage keys and secrets. So we may have auditors. And auditors, they don't need to manage the service, so there's no service management, but they need to list keys and secrets to audit them. An actual application, so that's the user of all of those data plane. Application doesn't need to manage the service, but application needs to have access to keys and secrets. So that's like a roles that what recommended to create for the classic model. It is not something that you may find on the portal. I mean, like how to create a role, but it should be on paper in your company. Like, okay, these users they should have management and keys access. This application only have access to get keys. This application also need to create keys, and so on. So now let's take a look on each of the features. First one, I will just show the slide, or maybe briefly show Key Vault certificates. Here we can manage certificate lifecycle, and so I can store certificates that issued by third party or my own certification authority, or even self-signed certificate. I can have all of those certificates, And the most important here, there's a lifecycle rules, a lifecycle management here, and you may be notified when the certificate reach some sort of life cycle. How's it called better? Life cycle date. For example, if certificate is near to expiration, you may be notified about this fact, or even can automatically renew the certificate if it's possible. So next one, keys. Keys, we need to use keys for encryption, to encrypt something, and keys may be software or hardware. So it's software will be stored in the software vault. Hardware will be stored in HSM. What is important here? You may create key right in the key vault, or you may bring your own key that you create with key management service on-prem, and you may just import this key to the cloud. So you may use your own key that you create somewhere on-prem as well. What is that? Oh, customer managed key. That's what I meant. What I mean. That's what I mean. And secrets. Secrets. That's a name value pair. So generally speaking, a secret, it's just a string value, and it may be anything else, anything you want. It may be password. It may be connection string. It may be even access keys, which is that also may be a string value. You will see it in the storage section. So key vault secrets, it's nothing more than string values. I think that's the last slide, so let me talk about this one. And the last one, when we talk about keys and secrets, we need to rotate them periodically. So keys and secrets we must organize the process of rotation. And by default, Microsoft does not provide you any process for this. I mean, like it doesn't. So the key vault itself doesn't have a rotation process. But what you can do, you may use your own programs and scripts to automate rotation. I'm going to show you this soon. So now let's take a look on actual certificates, keys, and secrets. Let me jump to certificates first and generate new certificate. So as you can see, I can say generate or import, and it may be self-signed certificate or issued by our own certification authority or third-party certification authority. And look this, so validity period is 12 months, and here I can say percentage of lifetime, and I can say if we reach 80% of our lifetime, renew certificate automatically, or notify person automatically. Also, what we can use not percentage, we can use number of days. So number of days before expiration. So when we reach this life cycle point, we can have notification or auto renewal if it's possible. So that's about certificate. Now let's take a look in closer details on keys and secrets. Let's click to keys, and let's click generate a new key. I can generate or I can import. Let's generate new key and store this key in HSM. Let's call it a new key. When we create a new key or secret, we have a few options. We can set up activation date. So activation date means that before this date, key will not work. So key will start to be active only from this date. And what you can expect, by the way, in the exam, you may be asked about how to create a key or secret. from command prompt from AZCLI. And what should you keep in mind if you create it from CLI? In CLI, activation date called NBF or none before. So AZCLI key vault activation date. It's none before. None before. So when you see NBF, it means none before or activation date. None before. Also, we may set up expiration date. In that case, the key will expire on specific date, and I can always enable or disable the key. Let me create a new one. And now I have a key, and I can use this key for my encryption. So let me go to go to virtual machine, disk, additional settings. I must start the virtual machine to use that. Let's start it. So it shouldn't take long. So after I start this virtual machine, I can go to disk. So not yet started. Can go to disk. Oh, it should work now. And now I can say I can encrypt. Select the key vault. Oh, this VM is not in North Europe, different region. That was useless. Let's quickly create a new one, the new virtual machine. Or maybe I have some VMs in West Europe. Let's run this one. So let's wait a bit before this machine is gonna start. Let's see, disk, additional settings. And let's take a look. Here I can see my new key vault and my key and the current version of this key. So now I can use this key to encrypt my disk of the virtual machine. That's how can I use keys. But if I actually want to use those keys, I must have key vault access policy. So I think that's obvious. So the user or application to access the key, it must have the access policy. All right, let me go back to the key vault. Go back to keys. So I have a secret. I have a key here, and if I want to do something with this key, I must have access policy. My user has, so that's the reason why I can see all of those keys, but it may not always be a case. So let me just remove the permissions. Let me say I don't want to have permissions to do anything with keys. Save this policy. Go to keys. Oh, look at this. So now I cannot see the keys anymore. Let me get my permissions back. now I can see key again. So now finally, let me remove this key, and this key is removed. But if I try to create a new key with the same name, no, doesn't work. Doesn't work. Why? Because this key was not removed completely. When I removed that, I have soft delete by default, and this key was not. It must be retained for 7 days in my case. So what I can do, I can go to manage delete keys, and see this key, and let's say purge. Hey, I don't have permission to purge. So in my access policy, you don't have this permission. All right, let me add permissions. Purge. And now I can purge the key, and that will be completely removed. So that's operation with keys. Now let's jump to secrets. Secrets, and create a new secret. In my case, let's call it connection string, and secret value, which is going to be something. As you can see here, we have also activation date, expiration date, the same for keys as for keys. Let's create the secret. And now I can use the secret for my applications. That's the thing that I want to show you in more details. Let me open my application and open Visual Studio. Recent project, Key Vault. That was a question about can we use it for on-prem. You may think about this like an on-prem. Come on, load the project. So that's a virtual machine, and as you can see, it's like I connect the Key Vault from the application itself. So it is not the Azure connectivity. All right. So what I can do here, I can add some code to my application. Here. So in my application, I can add some code to access Key Vault. In my case, the Key Vault name is AZ, something like this. Let me change the Key Vault and secret name to our. So let's go to Key Vault itself and find the Key Vault address. Change that. Then I want to have access to secrets, and if I go to secrets, the secret name is connection string. Let me copy this value, this name. And that should be it. So let's save that. Oh, sorry. So let's save that. What I'm doing here, I'm taking, I'm getting data from Key Vault, and I put the secret value to variable called viewback. So in viewback, my secret value will be added. Now what I want to do, I want to just put a view back to the page, to the actual web page. So this secret value should be visible for us. All right, let me run the application. Hopefully it won't take long. Just a regular MVC application, so it shouldn't take long. Hopefully it will. It won't. It won't. Maybe it will. Huh. That's odd. Application is quite small. Oh, finally. Look here. Here's my value that I have in the key vault. This weird value, that's what I type in the key vault. And this value now visible. And as you saw before, I didn't add any hard-coded things to my application. I just add the link to the key vault itself, and because application has permissions to access key vault. In my case, not a permission; it's a user. Not application; it's a user. Now I can see that value. So let's see, show secrets, and yeah, this weird value is there. All right, hope it makes sense. That's how can we use secrets in our applications. Let's stop this. So that's my secrets. Last thing I will quickly show you key rotation, key and secrets rotation. To actually make a rotation, we need to automate this process. And there are two approaches. How can we automate rotation? First one is Azure Automation PowerShell script, or Azure Functions, which is now more common, because automation is like an old approach, but now more common to use functions. Azure Functions. Maybe you heard about functions. Function is a serverless compute. And so here's my function to actually do a rotation. Let's see the code. Look at this. So there's a rotation for my keys, for my secrets when I store for my secrets when I store some secrets there, and it's a PowerShell code. Where I got that, you may find it freely available on the GitHub, on the Microsoft official GitHub. Azure Key Vault Rotation. And you may find, so first description how to do it, and there's a button deployed to Azure, and it will automatically open the GitHub for you with all of those codes, so you may just deploy it right from the GitHub. Of course, you must modify it a bit for your purposes, but here we have two examples. Here's the rotation with one set of secrets, and here's the rotation with two set of secrets. So you may easily find it on the web. And on Friday, I'm going to show you how key rotation may lead to compromise your key vault, but that's going to be on Friday. All right, so key vault. Any questions related to key vault? Any questions? Not yet. Maybe you need more time to type, but I'll handle that anyway. So key vault. With key vault, we can protect our connection strings, passwords, secrets, keys, and certificates, which is pretty handy tool and very important for the application security. On the exam, you may expect a lot of questions about key vault. And when I say a lot, I mean 5, 6. Compared to other topics, it's quite a lot. So expect to have several questions about key vault, and make sure you know how to create a key vault. You remember all of those activation dates, key vault access policies. So make sure you know that. The question: application must store credentials to access key vault. No, application do not need to store credentials. I'm going to show you in the next lesson in application security how application may access key vault. No, application doesn't need to store credentials. Now let's take a look on application security. It was also application security, by the way, before. But in this module, we're going to talk about identity and how to integrate applications with Microsoft Identity Platform. And in this module, also we'll talk about identity for key vault and application. So in this module, we're gonna talk how to integrate applications with Azure AD. If you have already existing applications, how can you integrate them with Azure AD? How can you configure permissions for them? So that's going to be our topic. All right. From here, let me open. Let me close this one. Open a new portal. With a different account. Give me a second. Yep, should work now. Applications. If you go to Azure AD, you may find here the blade called Interface Applications. If I click here, you may find the list of applications. What is that? I don't know. I mean, I know, but let's say I don't know. So what applications are in Azure AD? So applications in Azure AD, that's the way how can we integrate applications which are developed by somebody else with Azure AD. So you may authenticate to third-party application or even yours application that you develop using Azure AD credentials. And when you use Azure AD credentials, Azure AD authentication in general, you will not only use credentials but also security policies that you use in Azure AD also will work. For example, conditional access, MFA, all of this that we discussed on the first day will apply to those applications. All right, let's see that real quick. I'm going to click New Application. For some reasons, they changed the interface. To be honest, I'm not really proficient with the new interface. So I'm going to switch to the old one. And let's see options that we have with applications in Azure. The first, what we can do, we can integrate third-party application from the gallery that Microsoft knows. And so we can integrate third-party applications with our Azure AD. As you can see here in the gallery, we have 3,685 applications. Let's find the most well-known scenario, Salesforce CRM. It says you can integrate Salesforce using password-based sign-on or SAML. So I integrate Salesforce using SAML. How can I do that? For each of the applications from the gallery, Microsoft has instruction. Here's the tutorial, and here's the instruction how to do it. I'm not going to do it. I already did that. I already pre-created. I will just show you the result. But there is a long instruction. And if you look at the left, you will find instructions for each of the applications from the gallery. All right, let me show you this. Oh. So here I should see the list of my applications as the user this time. And if I click Salesforce, I have multiple redirects. I will explain you why. Maybe you already have a guess. And now I logged in to Salesforce, but I didn't type my username and password. I logged in with my Azure AD credentials. So now in Salesforce, I can log to Salesforce using SSO and my credentials Azure AD. And because I use my Azure AD credentials, I can use Azure AD security features to control my experience with those Salesforce. Do you remember on the first day I showed you the feature that not allow you to download documents? Let's try to download this one. Look at this. So now I say to Salesforce, I mean to users, Salesforce users, that they can download the document. And that's a feature of Azure AD Conditional Access plus Cloud Security. And it's not a feature of Salesforce. But because I logged into Salesforce with Azure AD, I can use those features in third-party applications. That's very cool, very cool. All right, so that's the first type of applications from the gallery that Microsoft knows and has the complete instruction for this application. The second type, is non-gallery application. Generally speaking, that's the same ways how can we integrate application, like it may be SAML-based or password-based, but there's no instruction. So Microsoft will not tell you how to do it. And maybe the application does not support some of those single sign-on. So SAML may not be supported. Password-based will be supported anyway, but password-based, of course, is not really authentication method. Let me show you what is that, what password-based is. I have an application called Pyrus. If I go to pyrus.com, change the language, and click login, look at this. I must log into using my email address and then password, and then after this, I can log into Pyrus. But Pyrus does not support SAML-based authentication. But I want to have some sort of single sign-on to this Pyrus. So what I can do, I can enable password-based single sign-on. What is that? In that case, Azure AD will be like a password manager, and it will store your username and password in Azure AD, and will type this username and password for you. Let me show you this. So I click Pyrus, and look at this. So it typed username and password for me, and I just need to click login. So actual values stored in Azure AD, but there's a special extension called I cannot zoom it. My app secure sign-in extension. So you must install this extension. It may be installed on Chrome, maybe installed on the Edge, and this extension will take the value from Azure AD and type it for you. So let me click login, and now I'm inside of the mailbox. That's for non-gallery application. You may use password-based single sign-in. That will always work. Next one, on-prem applications. So that's application that you have on premises, and you want to publish this application to the public internet, to the public users, to external users. So in that case, if you want to publish your application, you must install. You must use the feature called application proxy. App proxy. Let me show you this. So first, I'm going to Azure Active Directory and find application proxy menu here. Click here, and here I can see that I must install connector to one of my servers on-prem. So the server with connector must have access to the application from inside of the network, using private name, private addresses. So I must install the connector, and what is important by connector, by the way, it uses outbound ports to provide you an access, not inbound, outbound. So you install the connector, and then you go to application registration, in the rest applications, click new application, old experience, on-prem application, and here I can specify the name. Let's call it app1. Internal URL. That's actual URL 444 application internally. So that's an internal name of the application that already exists in my network. Then I can specify the external name, domain. Of course, you can use your own domain, but you must create a DNS record for this. And the most interesting thing, you may enable pre-authentication, and in that case, user must log into Azure AD first to actually reach your application. So when you finish with that, you're all set. You may try. I already have an application called Remote Desktop, which was published. Let me show you first. If I connect to my server, here's the RDS, my terminal server. Let me take the RDS web page and try to open this page from outside. No, it doesn't work, of course. but it works from inside of the network. What I can do, I can publish this RDS. Let me show you the application, my publish application. So I use my internal URL for it. That's the URL for connector, internal URL, and I publish that with the external name. And I use pre-authentication in Azure AD. So let me copy this value. And look at this. It says we don't have access right now. Can you tell me what is that? Oh, I can see the question here. I'm going to handle your question after this demo. What is that? What can you see on the screen? That's the message from which feature, from which service. No ideas? Come on, you learned that on Monday. That's conditional access policy. That I mean, why I cannot have access? Because conditional access. Because I have conditional access policy, and if I look at the conditional access policy, if I look at the policy for RDS, I can see my condition, and according to my condition, I can have access only from Netherlands. So RDS may be opened only from Netherlands. Let's do it real quick. So I'm gonna jump to the workstation. It should be in the Netherlands. Yeah, it's in the Netherlands. So it should work now. Yep, that should work. And application was opened. So that's how can we publish applications. What is also interesting, by the way, about the application, if I look at the application, this application, it is not enough to just add application. You must also add users. You must also assign this application to users. And so, and for this application, only one user can have access. Let me just say sign out. Let's close this. So this time, let me access this application from Netherlands, but with the account that is not listed as the application user. Look at this. Now I have a different error that this time from application proxy. It says, hey, you are not authorized. You cannot do that. So you must also add the user to the application if you want them have to have access. You may change this behavior if you don't want. If you just scroll to properties, you may say user assignment required. It's yes by default for a proxy. You may say no, and in that case, everyone can have access. But if you say yes, then only user who are signed may have access to this application. All right, so hope it makes sense. And that's the third way. How can we add third-party applications to my Azure AD? And let me handle the question. Can I integrate ADFS from our external partner into my tenant for enterprise application and using SAML authentication or password base? Scenario, our partner have ADFS with their line of business web application. The purpose, we are using cloud identity model and would like to integrate our Azure and accounts into their ADFS for authentication. Yeah, that's possible. That's possible. You have multiple ways. How can you do that? Multiple ways. The most, I would say, recommended, if it's possible, the most recommended is to configure B2B with their Azure AD, if they have. So if they have Azure AD, you may integrate your Azure AD with their Azure AD, and that's the most recommended, like a most secure way. If it's not the case, what you can do, you may go to your Azure AD, go to and find where's that? Oh, external identities. And here you can add provider, identity provider, and you may say Google, Facebook, or I guess that's what you need. That's what you need. So just go to Azure AD and get external identity. You may find it there. So yeah, that's possible. All right. And let's take a look on the last one. The last way, how can we integrate applications? Maybe not the last way, but last way from this enterprise application menu. So the last one is application you're developing. That's when you have your own application that you own, and you may add authentication with Azure AD to your application. So let me click here, and it says, hey, if you want to work with that, you must go to app registration. All right, let's go there. Click app registrations. By the way, in parallel, let me why I'm closing that. Let me open Visual Studio again. So you must register application if you want to integrate this application with Azure AD. So you click New Registration, give a name, that's internal name, let's call it App1, and you can say who can have access to this account. Only my tenant or B2B users, or also or accounts from or personal accounts as well. And then I must specify redirect URI. And this here let me show you what is that redirect URI. For this purposes, I'm going to open another application, which is also MVC, but serves a different purpose. And I already add some code. Let me remove important value. And let's say debug. So let me read the question. So you use ADFS. You just in your case that you mentioned in about ADFS. So what you need to do, you must publish ADFS and add this ADFS as an external identity. So in your case, if I understand correctly, your case, your partner will publish ADFS, and you add this ADFS, partner ADFS, as an external identity. All right. So now I have my application. So let me click sign in. You're welcome. Now I have sign in, and look at this. Doesn't work. Doesn't work. Sign in doesn't work. Of course, I remove some portion of code. So what I want to do next, I want to copy this value, and that is my redirect URI. So I copy this value, my sign-in page, and add this page to redirect URI, and click register. So now I have my application registered, and this application now in Azure AD. What developers need to actually integrate application with their own application. So at this moment, application is not integrated. I have a separate registration in my Azure AD, and I have application in the cloud. Now it's time to integrate them. So first, I must provide endpoints to the application. That's a Microsoft endpoint for authentication, authorization endpoint. Then I must expose API for the application. So I just go to this blade and set application ID URI. It may be any ID I want. One like this. So I create a URI for this application, and this URI must be used in my application code either. Now let me just stop the debugging. Let's turn back this value, and look at this. So I use some up settings, and here I specified my my application, my URI for the application, my tenant, and actual endpoint, Microsoft endpoint. Let's try again. Let me run the application. Fingers crossed. Hopefully it will work. Let's click sign in. And look at this. So now I can sign in with my credentials. Oh, a user not signed the role for the application. So it looks like the user, if I look at the application, roles administrators. Why didn't the role, by the way? Role, something new. That's a new thing. All right, let's say allowed user. Let's say me. I know this should be here, but let me just try to guess. What is that? That's a new thing I haven't seen before. Um, um, let's try again. Nope. I don't know what it's all about, to be honest. That's a new feature. Up rolls in preview. I haven't seen it before. I think it was added. Oh, it can't be deleted. um, disable. I don't know what is that. Let me check permissions of the application. Maybe I can just remove this. If I go to my applications, go to properties, assignment required. Let me just remove assignment. Um, yep, looks like. Let me see the users. Oh yeah, there's no assignment, of course. But I know what application roles are. It's something new. But looks like I had to add this user to the list of assigned users. All right. So now I logged into the application. Yeah, I don't have a name in my profile, so that's the reason why it says hello nobody. But now I logged in with my credentials, with my Azure AD credentials to my application. So that's what you can do when you integrate application with Azure AD. All right, so now we should discuss a couple of more things. It will take maybe 15 more minutes, and then we're gonna have a break and a lab as well. So let me go back to my application. And if I look at the permissions, I can see that some permissions may be assigned to this application. There's no permissions in this application. Let's see some other applications. Let's see. DevOps permissions. No permissions here. All right, demo permissions. Oh, user. Oh, we have user permissions. Sorry, it's not. There's no admin permissions. So when you have the application may have some permissions in your Azure AD. I can compare it to make it more clear for you with mobile applications. So when you install application from the store, like from Android, from Play Market, application asks you to access the disk, camera, microphone, and so on. So it's very similar in Azure AD. So when you add application to Azure AD, you must add some permissions to the application. Let me show you this. If I open the new window, and let's say I want to open demo wd.microsoft.com, and I want to sign in with user called JDO. What is the password? All right. That works. Let me check why it works. There's no admin consent here. Why? Oh, the demos, sorry. It's a different story, different application. Permissions. Oh, here's the admin consent, of course. Here's the admin consent. At least you saw that that works. All right, let's try another application. Let's try this one, demo, myers.com. Oh, thank you. Doesn't work either. So what else I can try? Skype. Not sure. Let's see, Skype. Permissions. Not sure that will work. If not, I will switch another tenant where I have more applications. Let's try Skype. Sign in. My account. No, that's only the personal account. All right, so let's try the different one. Let me open portal. This. So what I want to show you, the when you install the application from the Android store, it asks you for consent to provide permissions, and the same thing should be here. So it asks you for permissions, and you must provide consent to allow those permissions, or you may manually configure permissions as well. Let me find some applications here. I should have more of them. Yeah, I have more applications. Let's take transform. Transform should be fine. Yeah, let's take transform. Let's also see demo. Do we have consent here or not? Permissions. Yeah, there's a consent from admin. Let's go to let's take transform. Transform. Permissions. Yeah, there's no admin consent, only user consent from me. All right, so that should work. If I go to transform.microsoft.com, click sign in. No way. It looks like I have multiple instances of the transform, and one of those has something. Jeez. What can I try? What else I can try? Yeah, I ran out of applications. Demos. Let's try demos. So always struggle to find application. I think I need to pre-create application. Let's see, demo. Oh, come on. Looks like all of my applications are done. Um, hmm. All right, let's try to sign out from my application. Maybe that will work. And let's say, what permissions do I have here? Permissions, user consent. That may work. Data. No. Oh. What is the password? Come on again. I don't know where's that. So what I want to show you. First of all, when you have application, this application must have some permissions in Azure AD. For example, if I have application like demos, this application must get some data from Azure AD about signing user and user profile. This application needs this information. And when you log in to the application for the first time, it will ask you for consent. It should look like it looks like this. Like this. So it asks you for permissions, and you must accept them as a user if you want to work with the application. So application will get some data from you, and you must provide a consent. And it will automatically add permissions to the application list. So what you can do, you may provide user consent, and every time when the new user logs in for the first time, it will ask for consent, user for consent, and user must accept the consent. What you can do alternatively, you can provide admin consent. That's what I'm doing now. Admin consent. Admin consent, that's a consent on behalf of the whole organization. So when user logs in, user provides information about himself, but when admin logs in, admin can provide consent on behalf of the organization, of the whole organization. And if I provide admin consent, then users will not be asked for consent anymore. It's like, yeah, I allow all of the I allow this application to read information about all of my users. So that's called admin consent. So here I can say I will allow to sign and read user profile for all of my users on behalf of my organization. That's called admin consent. So you must give consent to the application to access some information about the user. And you may provide user consent, and each user must do it, or you may provide admin consent once, and then users will not be asked for consent. Individual users will not be asked for consent. And so generally speaking, consent, it's nothing more than permissions. And we can also configure permissions manually. So if you go to application permissions, you may configure applications manually. Let me show you this. If I go to my application registration, so here's the permissions, and what I can say, I can add permission. Oh, that's why they all sign in without problem. I have the permission sign in the read profile. I can say here that I can provide permissions to my users. And please take notes. That's important that you will find on the exam. And that may be confusing, so that take notes about this. There are two types of permissions. Interactive, which called delegated. This permission you need when you do something on behalf of the user. So when application accesses some data on behalf of the user, that's called delegated permissions. But there is another type of permission called application permissions, and this thing is usually confusing people because it's a permission for application, which is called application permission. The name is really crazy. So application permission, that's a permission for non-interactive process. When you don't need to have user signed in. For example, maybe background service that synchronize something. So this permission non-interactive. And if you look at the type of if you look at the permissions, let me click delegated and look here. In case of delegated, it's a profile, sign in user, and so on. If it's application permission, that's a different set of permissions. So, two types of permissions that you may associate to your applications if you want your users, your applications to have permissions. All right, so that's permissions. And now the very last thing, promise you, and then you'll have a break, lab, and lunch. The question was in the first session, the first part, how users can have access to Key Vault. Not users, sorry, applications. How applications can have access to Key Vault. Do we need to provide the username and password? No, we don't. So what we can do, we can use the approach called managed identity, also known as MSI, managed identity. So for each service in Azure, not each, it serves each compute service, you may create an identity, and this identity will have access to Key Vault or some other services. Let me show an example. So I have virtual machine, I guess. Let's say mod security virtual machine. Come on. That's better. So, and if you look at the virtual machines, you may find identity section here. Oh, by the way, when we worked with Kubernetes last time, we'll also use that to provide access. So, and when you click to identity, you may enable, you may turn on system assigned identity for this virtual machine. Click save, click yes. And what will happen? It will create a new identity in Azure AD for this specific virtual machine. Now, if I go to Key Vault and find my Key Vault, go to access policy, I can add access policy, and in my principal, I can find mod security. So now I gave access to get list and let's say set secrets to this virtual machine. So that's how you provide access to applications using this managed identity. Let me go back to virtual machine. So I enable here what's called system assigned managed identity. System assigned means that we'll have one-to-one relations between identity and the resource. So this is an identity for specific virtual machine, and this identity will be removed after we remove virtual machine. So that's a one-to-one relations between object and identity. It may be fine if you want to manage life cycle of identity like this. So like you just manage resource, and identity will be managed with the resource itself. But what you can also do, what you can alternatively do, you can pre-create identity, and associate identity with specific resource. So let's go to managed identities, create a new one. Let's call it my VMs. Create. So now I'm creating the independent identity, which will not have dependency on the life cycle of the specific object. So it will be independent. Now it's a separate object. And now what I can do, I can associate a virtual machine with this identity. And I can associate multiple VMs with this identity. So I can associate 10 VMs with the same identity. And now if I go back to Key Vault, and in the same manner, I can provide access to this new identity, my VMs. Look at this, it's also here. And now I can do the same for this identity. All right, hope it makes sense. So with using managed identity, we tell to the application it must access the Key Vault and what access it has with the Key Vault. All right, finally, we finished the session number 1. We finished session number 1, and it's time to try it yourself. In this module, we have only one lab, but this lab is pretty large. We will use Key Vault, lab 10. We'll use Key Vault, but we'll use Key Vault with the feature of SQL Server that we will learn in the next session. So that's pretty good that you will try this feature. So the next session, you will understand what this feature is all about. But we will use Key Vault to work with SQL Server encryption. So you will see how can you use Key Vault with SQL Server to encrypt columns. So now, as usual, you have your time to the lab and the lunch, and we'll see you as usual at 1:30 p.m. Be careful with instruction, because if you miss some pieces in the instruction, it may not work. And also, by the way, I remember some cases when people just copy. So when the code from instruction was copied, it was broken. So make sure that the code for the application that you copy from the instruction, it's the same code without missing pieces. Make sure. In that case, if everything will be copied well, then lab will work. Can I give you a slide? You mean the whole slide deck? No, I'm not allowed to share slides with you, but you have the same slides, the same pictures in the book. If you open the official book, you will find all of those slides as screenshots. So you may find there. All right. So lab number 10, 1:30 p.m. And lunch. So good luck with the lab. As usual, if you need help, let me know. have a good lunch, lab, and see you at 1:30 p.m., where we will talk about storage and SQL databases.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah. Thank you, and see you in a bit. Now I get back.
No worries, Sergey. I think we had one scenario-based questions over chat. So maybe now you can look now the lunchtime is over. That's fine. Thank you.
So I have a question, like a lab SQL must have credentials, access key vault to get encryption key. What if I disable the account that was logged into SQL before? I'm not really sure what is the account was logged to SQL. I think you mean that this identity that you use in the code. If you disable this account, then you'll fail to retrieve the key. So if you encrypt the data and then you disable account that you used to decrypt the data, then you will fail to decrypt it. Data will remain the same, but it will be encrypted. Um, all right, give me a moment up. I'm gonna open the presentation and we'll share my screen again. All right. Uh, so, I hope the lab was fine, and the lab should be very useful because you not only work in the lab with the key vault, but also you work with SQL databases, SQL Server. And one of the technologies that you use was used there, we'll cover in this session. So, session number 2 about storage security and database security. So first, we're gonna talk about storage security. Before I start talk about storage security, let me quickly say what the storage is and why do we need storage, because quite often I see some misunderstanding from IT professional side. Storage. We need storage not for the user data, not for not for user files, not for documents or something like this. We use storage. Of course, we may store anything we want there, but quite often we use storage to store some data related to application. Let me give an example here. So I have an application, and this application, what this application can do for you. This application may have okay, I hope, yeah, that's fine. That's muted. So application, and application has some users. Now let's not. Now it's muted. So application has some users and data. For example, application may have images for goods. If it's an online store, something like this, for example, Amazon.com. There are pictures here in front of any good. Those pictures should be stored somewhere. So that's images. They should be stored somewhere. Another example. Content to download. Maybe video instructions, software. That should be also also things that should be stored on storage. So we don't store this data on the actual virtual machine. We store this data on the blob storage. But but storage is not for, it is not for uh, user documents. No, it is not. It's not. So we store some data related to application, but not to every user. So the storage, it is not the solution to move, file server that you have on-prem with bunch of files of users to the cloud. If you want to move your file server, use SharePoint for this. Use OneDrive for Business. It is not the blob storage. It's not blob storage. Not the best. Not the best solution here. Blob storage is ideal to store some data related to application. When you have application with some large files like images or videos, software, then it's a good solution to store the blobs there, those images there. All right. That's one of the examples. Another example. So that's about blob storage. Also, we have not only blob storage, we have also file shares. Azure file shares. And why do we may need to have file shares? File shares, they are also not for user data. File share file share is the share to share the storage across multiple nodes. So, for example, you need to store some data across multiple nodes. So you need to share data, some configuration files across multiple nodes. You have a farm of servers and you need to share config files related to application across multiple nodes. So you can do it with file share, Azure file share. Because the difference between Azure file share and the blob, the biggest difference, file share may be mounted to multiple. Azure blob storage will not be mounted. Azure blob storage is just a storage. It's like an external storage. But the difference between Azure file share and the storage inside of the virtual machine, like a hard drive, is file share may be mapped to multiple nodes at the same time. So file share is mapped to multiple nodes. That's the key idea about this file share. It's mapped across multiple nodes. So that's when we use file share. Now let's see how can we protect and control access to those storage types, those blob storage and file share. First, storage, we can choose the region when the storage will be used. And so we can choose where should be stored, and maybe stored closer to users, and also stored in the boundaries where it's allowed for our company, because of regulations may require to store in some specific region. Then we need to configure access to the storage. And that's going to be quite a large topic, so I will spend a lot of time on the storage access. Let me jump demo. And from here, let's create a new storage. Storage account. Let's give a name, AZ500 yet. And let's click create. Alright, that shouldn't take long. And as soon as the storage will be available, I will start to configure access to the storage. And also I will add maybe 1-2 files to show that this access works fine. Storage. Come on. All right. And so here I'm gonna create containers. Create new container. Let's call it new. Click create. Upload the blob. So let's take this one. And that's it. Now I have the blob with one of the blob on the storage, and now let's play a bit with the access. The first type of access that we may provide to is access via access keys. These access keys, this type of access may give a full control over the storage. So with these access keys, I can do whatever I want on the storage account. I can create, I can remove, so I can do whatever I want. Sometimes application need this type of storage, this type of access. So let's see. I copy the key. Also, what I can copy the whole connection string. That will be key with. So there's going to be key with a connection string. So how can I open the How can I open my storage account with this key? I can use Storage Explorer for this. Let's see. I want to say here that I want to add storage account. And here I have multiple ways to connect. One of those is to connect using connection string. Another one using storage account name and the key. Let me choose one of those. Let's say storage account name and the key. Let's click next. So display name will be maybe any. Account name is AZ500. Yet. And also I need to specify the whole URL is like, maybe that will work without the whole URL. Let's just try to take a key. Fingers crossed. Yep, that worked. So and I can see my container, and I can see my blob. So I can open the blob here, or I can create a new container. Let's say from whatever says from. And now if I look at the containers, I can see from here. So that's the first way. In that case, we can have full access to the blob without any restrictions with this into any service with this access key. And so you must provide this key to the application. It may be not a very good idea to use the key itself. So you probably know that we can store this key as a secret in the key vault and just access key vault. So if you need to use access key in your application, it's better to use key vault. I mean, to deploy this key with a key vault than hard code the key itself. So that's access keys. So with them, you can have full access to the storage. And we have two access keys, key 1 and key 2. And if key was compromised, we can regenerate the key. And now the key number 1 was regenerated. And if I try to access the storage again, it should fail soon. Let's close this. Let's see. Look at this. So you can't retrieve data anymore because key is not correct. That's about keys, and they provide full access to actual storage. If you can, and those keys, we may use them for the application when the application needs to have persistent access to storage without user interactions, so persistent access. But if you use keys, then once again it's better to use it where key vault secrets than keys directly, because if you use directly keys in the storage in the code, in the application code, then it's hard to then regenerate the keys. All right, that's the first way. Let's move on, and the next way is going to be more restrictive. The next way called SAS, or Shared Access Signature. With this type of access, you will generate a URL and that will have the signature, and only using this URL you may have access to blob. So let's see that. Let me close this. Just remove this data. So before I go to SAS, let me show you that I have the blob, and this blob, let me see the URL of this blob. Has this URL, but this URL is not available because my container is not public. So my access level for the container is private, so there is no anonymous access, and that's the reason why I cannot see the actual blob. Now let's play a bit with access to see the blob. So I'm going to Shared Access Signature, or SAS, and here what I can do, I can generate some sort of access. And let's say I want to generate access for blobs for a specific object, for objects. I mean, not to the container, but to the object. I want to allow a read only. That's enough. and I want to allow access from now to, let's say, 6 p.m. in my local time zone. Also, I can say for which IP address it should work. And the most important here, it will be signed by the key 1 or key 2. That's the key that we discussed previously. So it will be signed with one of the keys. Let's click generate the stream. And now I can see there's a SAS token that can also read, by the way. So I can see that SS means service blob, SRT it means the type of object. That's about object, not container. That's a permission. Read and execute. Expiration time and start time. Protocol and signature. So what I can do, I can take this signature and add to my blob URL. Look at this. Now I can open this blob. By the way, that's how my son, when he was 2, he found a way to hack Linux. So that's the way how people provide access to my specific blobs. This access may be generated by application, and for example, if user needs to download something, user will not have just a URL to the file. User will get this type of access and can download only from specific address or using specific operations or in some period of time. So we can generate that. So our application may generate this type of access. And what is important, if I modify anything here, it will not work anymore. Let's say I want to add write access as well, and try again. Nope, doesn't work. So signature must be exactly the same if I want to have access. All right, hope it makes sense. And I want to ask you, how do you think? What if signature was compromised? What if this signature became public and was compromised, and you want to revoke it? How can you do that? Just tell me, what do you think? If you need to revoke signature, how can you do that? Any ideas so far? No ideas? All right, let me show you a couple of things that you may try to use, and if this work or not. So first thing you can try, you can generate a new signature. Let's say I want to change the expiration time, generate a new SAS, copy this, and now I have a new SAS, new signature. So if I add this signature to my blob, that should work. Yeah, that worked. But the old signature still working. So if I add the old signature, that also works. So when you generate the new signature, it will not revoke the previous one. That will not help you. So what you must do if you want to revoke this signature, you must regenerate the key that you used to sign the signature. So you go to Access Keys, you click Regenerate the key, and now both of my signatures, because they all for them both, I used first key. They shouldn't work. That was cached. Let's try in open in private. Nope, doesn't work. So key doesn't exist anymore. That used to sign this access URL. So that's the way. How can you provide access? In like more controlled access with time limits, with operations limits, and then you can revoke this access when you generate the key that we used to sign this access URI. All right, so let's go to containers from here, and let's find the specific blob. And if you look at the blob, you may generate this SAS on the blob level. So if I click generate the SAS, I can do the same, but for a specific file. So if previously I create a blob for the whole storage, and I add the URI to any of my blobs, I can alternatively create the access only for specific blob. So in that case, I don't need to share all of the blobs on my storage. I just do it for a specific blob. So you can do it for a specific one. Also, what I can do with access level, I can open access policy on my container level. And I can say I can create stored access policy, which is also some sort of permissions and time. What is that? Stored access policy, that's the way how can we limit existing SAS on the storage level, but we can limit that on the container level. For example, let's say I have SAS. This one doesn't work anymore, but who cares? So I have SAS, and let's say in my SAS, this SAS must expire by this period, and must start in this period. So that's my SAS for all of my blobs. What I can do, I can say, but for this container, the start time will be later, and the expiration time will be earlier. So you may add additional limits to existing SAS for specific container. It will not. So this policy will not work without SAS. But when you already have a SAS, you may add additional limits to the SAS. So that's the way how can we configure access using those SAS policies. And the last one is SAS based on Azure AD. What I can do, I can switch to Azure AD. So let's say switch to Azure AD. And in that case, authentication may be done using Azure AD. And then I need to provide storage blob data owner or reader or contributor to one of the user if I want to use Azure AD. So let me find JDO user. Let's see that. All right, and so now if I open in private, log in with this JDAW. Thanks that you mute your microphone, because I already wanted to mute yours. So now JDAW is the blob owner. All right, I need to have access on the blob level on the storage account level as well. All right, so let's refresh. No, let's refresh the whole page. Not listed here. Interesting. Let's sign out. And sign back in. Hopefully it will work now. Now, let me check this storage account. Yeah, I think I need another permissions to just read the storage account itself. So let me go to storage account. Let's add a new row. Let's say contributor to storage account. That should work now. Still nothing. Let's try the last time. Sign out and sign back in. All right, let me check what's going on here. Maybe I used the wrong account. Jada. No, that's the right one. That's the right one. I should see the actual storage account. That's a bit odd. All right. It should work. Not from the Azure CLI. It should work. I don't know why it doesn't work from the portal. But the idea of this. Let me go back to containers. If I open container, oh, it wasn't switched. It wasn't switched. So what I can do? I can switch to Azure AD authentication Azure AD authentication. And what will happen? The users who has this permission in role assignment, like storage blob data contributor, owner, reader, those users can read the content on the blob storage. So when you switch from access key to Azure AD and log in with Azure AD, then you can have access to blobs based on your Azure AD, based on your Azure AD credentials, not on the keys, but Azure AD account. So that's the ways how can we provide access to blob storage. There's one more for Azure files. If I look at the Azure file shares, let me create file share. Let's say 1, 2, 3. So for file share, there's generally speaking nothing to configure. So I can add directory. I can upload the new document, but there's no access control for file shares. How can I control access if I need? What you can do, you can go to IAM, and it says, hey, if you enable integration with Azure AD, then you can have a control using IAM here. Let's go back to properties. Not properties, configuration. And here, if I scroll it down, what I can do, I can enable integration with Azure AD directory services. That's the service that we didn't discuss on Monday. So what the service is all about? This one is like managed domain in Azure. So let's imagine you have application that has dependency on on-prem Active Directory. So you must have on-prem ID if you want to deploy application. But you don't want to deploy a domain controller in the cloud to manage that because it's virtual machine, you must install updates and so on. What you can do alternatively, you can deploy Azure AD Domain Service, and this Azure AD Domain Service will synchronize accounts from Azure AD, but create Kerberos Active Directory in Azure AD. So what you can do if you create this type of domain in your Azure AD, then you may enable integration with this type of domain for your file share, and file share may have access. You may control access on your file share using those domain credentials. All right, that's all access level that we may configure for Azure storage. All right, the last thing about Azure storage is data protection. So first, what you can do, you can turn on data protection, and if you remove some of the blobs, you may restore them. For example, you may have soft delete, and that if you remove, you may restore it, or you may turn on versioning, and so you can restore the previous version if the blob was modified. So there are a number of ways how can you restore data if it was deleted, but by default it won't be turned on. You may turn it on manually. But when you create it from the portal, on the portal there was in the wizard there's the option to turn it on. And the last one on container, what you can do also, you can create access policy, and with access policy you may say that you want to hold data based on the tag or based on the time period. And so if you choose that, let's say time period, I want to say I want to retain all of the data at least 10 days. And so it means that this data cannot be removed next 10 days. It's not about recovery. That's about the retention. So if you have compliance requirement to store data not less than 10 days, you may hold all of the data at least 10 days. Let's try to remove now. nope, doesn't work. So 10 days, so at least 10 days it must be stored. At least 10 days. And also, I can hold for legal purposes. In that case, I can hold only documents with specific tag. In that case, maybe for some purposes, specific documents maybe also hold for those legal purposes. All right. So that's about blob. It's about storage and some sort of access and retention that we can configure. Last thing about storage is encryption. Storage is encrypted by default, and if you go to the storage and find encryption, you may find that storage is encrypted. So storage is encrypted. But what you can do, you may change the key for this encryption. So you may say that this storage will be encrypted, but will be encrypted by your key, not by Microsoft key, but by your key. So what you can do, you may change to customer managed key and select the key vault. No keys. I guess it's not because there are no keys. It's because my account doesn't have permissions to access keys. Let's check. Oh, there are no keys. Oh, I removed the keys. Yeah, I removed all the keys. That's the reason. Let's generate a new key. Let's try again. And the key appeared. Let's click select and click save. And now it will encrypt the storage with my key, my customer managed key, not by Microsoft key. By the way, also you should keep in mind that tables and queues, which we don't discuss in this course, but anyway, it's also part of storage account. They will always use Microsoft managed key. So customer managed key may be used only for blobs and files, but not for tables and queues. All right, so that's about storage. It's about storage. And now the storage is encrypted with my key, my own key. So that's storage. And from storage, let's jump to databases. And let's see how can we manage database security. First idea is database authentication, SQL database authentication. We need to authenticate in a database. And we have a number of ways to authenticate. First way is a classic, when we use SQL authentication. So username on the SQL server and the password. So that's supported. That's supported in Azure. But also I want to show you one of the interesting things, which is not on the slide, but also you should know about that. How the variation of SQL authentication is contained user. So what is that? When you authenticate to the SQL database, the credentials stored in the in the master database, in the master DB of the SQL Server. And so when you want to access specific database, this database must have credentials. So you will use credentials that exist on the SQL Server. But what if you move the database to another SQL Server? In that case, another SQL Server may not have those credentials. And when you move the database, you must recreate the credentials on another SQL Server if you want to have if you want to continue to have access to this database using SQL authentication. But there's an alternative. How it may be done. Alternative called contained, a database with contained user. In that case, the database itself will have all of the credentials stored there in the database, and so you don't need a master DB to authenticate. So all the dependencies will be stored in the database itself, and so the database may be moved to the different server and work as previously. So without dependency to the specific SQL server. That's called contained model. Keep it in mind, it also supports in Azure. So you may do that. You may configure that like an alternative to SQL Server authentication, classic authentication. But in Azure, also what we have Azure AD authentication as well. So we can allow access based on the Azure AD credentials. And let's see how to do that. Let me go to the database. Server. Let's open my test database. And what I can do, I can let me open Management Studio. So if I open Management Studio and I want to connect to the database server, I have Azure AD connectivity. So it's possible to use Azure AD to connect to the database, but it is not enabled by default. To enable this, you must go to your SQL Server in Azure, which is managed SQL Server, and you must go to Azure Active Directory Admin and create new admin. So you must set new admin if you want to work with Azure AD credentials with in your database. So create a new Azure AD admin, and then you're all set. Then Azure AD credentials will work, and you must also, of course, specify who will be who will have access, in which Azure AD user will have access. So after this, it will support Azure AD credentials in your database. All right, so let me connect using my Azure AD credentials. And now I should have connectivity to the database. I should have. Let's see. So yes, I do. Yep. Tables. It takes some time, but it should give an access to tables. So authentication, maybe as a classic SQL, maybe contained, or maybe it's Azure AD. So you may use Azure AD authentication for that. And when you connect to the Azure SQL database, there's a one thing that will prevent your connectivity. That's called firewall. So by default, when you use Azure SQL, it has a firewall on the server level and also the database level as well. And the database level as well. Server level firewall and database level firewall. Let's see that. If I go to the SQL Server, and here I can find firewall settings, and I can say which IP address can access the database. So I can whitelist my IP address. My current IP address is this one. And by the way, I think you did that in the lab previously. So you must allow your IP address to run queries on the SQL Server. So for example, if I try to run query editor, no, it will not work because my current IP address not allowed. So I need to whitelist my IP address. So that's firewall. That's firewall. And we can whitelist some IP addresses. That's the first thing we can do. Also, what we can do, we can allow any Azure IP address access the SQL Server. This is a very popular configuration, but be careful. When you turn that on, it means that any Azure IP address will have access to SQL Server. Not only your subscription, any Azure IP address. So for example, if you have SQL Server and you enable this, I can spin up virtual machine in Azure in any subscription and have access to your SQL Server. Of course, I need to know username and password, but firewall will not block me to access SQL Server if I do it from Azure. So if you turn that on, any Azure VM from any subscription from any customer from any company may have access to your SQL Server. So it's not very safe configuration. And also, what you can do, you can make your SQL private. So you may deny public access, and in that case, you need to create a private endpoint and allow access only from specific endpoints. So that's what we discussed yesterday about private endpoints. So you may create it. So you may make your SQL private, and in that case, nobody will have access except these endpoints that have private access. That's the most recommended and the most secure configuration. All right, that's about firewall, and that was a server level firewall. But how about database level firewall? Can we configure it here? No. Database level firewall must be configured using Transact SQL. So if you look at them, this diagram, so server level may be configured from the portal, from the PowerShell, or Transact SQL. Database may be configured only using Transact SQL. And if you scroll down, you may find how to do that using Transact SQL. So here, there are rules to configure it on the server level with Transact SQL, and the rules to configure it on the database level. So create or update rule, display rule, and remove rule. The three statements. So that's the firewall on the database level or on the whole server level. Server level may be configured via interface. Database level configured only using Transact SQL. Then, when we have database with and a firewall configured, we may enable auditing for the database. And so audit logs, so we may enable or disable audit logs. And also what we can do, we can retain those logs on the storage account for the if you want to then upload those logs to your SIEM system, or you want to store logs for a long period of time, you may export that to storage account. Let's see that. If I go to let's say database, SQL database, and there's an auditing here, I can turn on or turn off auditing. And look here, so I can store this. I can store that on the storage account. So I can check the box and store it on the storage account. Choose a storage account and say for how many days I want to retain. So it may be a very huge number. So it's up to 10 years. It's around 10 years, 9 years, something like this. It's kind of huge number. And you may choose for how long you need to retain those logs. They will be stored in the storage account. Of course, the longer you store them, the more you will pay. That's obvious. Next one, data discovery and classification. What you can do and what should you do for compliance purposes is classify columns in your database. Because GDPR, for example, requires you to have data classified even in your database. So if you have some data about European Union citizens, residents, in your databases, you should classify this data because that's a requirement of GDPR. So if you want to be compliant, you must classify this data. What SQL can do for you, Azure SQL, it may allow you to classify data, and also it will suggest, it will also give you some suggestions how to classify better based on the content. Let me click to recommendations, and here you can see that I have email address, password, phone number, and it recommends me to apply confidential label to the column. Let's say I want to apply confidential to phone number. Let's say accept. And that's it. It was classified. And now I have one classification. Let's say that. So now I have one classification, and there are a lot of columns not classified. And if I go back to classification, recommendation, add classification, I can classify some other classifications manually, or also follow the recommendations, other recommendations. So there's a classification for compliance purposes. You may find it there. By the way, what is important? The menu on the left was changed last month, and in instruction you may still have the old navigation. So in instruction on the left, you may still have the menu called Advanced Security. And under Advanced Security, there are classification, also vulnerability assessment, and threat protection. So it was in October. That was navigation looked like that in October, somewhere in the beginning of October. So we had a menu Advanced Security here, and under Advanced Security you can find classification, vulnerability assessment, and threat protection. Now it's different. Classification is separate. Classification is a separate menu now. And vulnerability assessment and threat protection under Security Center. So you must go to Security Center and find vulnerability assessment and threat protection there. So navigation is changed, but in the instruction in the lab, you may still have the old navigation. All right, so that's about classification. Now let's see vulnerability assessment. What is that? Vulnerability assessment, that's a feature that may automatically assess your database and tell what should you fix. Let's see what they have for this database. I go to Security Center, vulnerability assessment here. Oh, there's no here. Oh, let's see assessment. And here you can see some recommendations. First one about firewall rules. So it recommends me to have a minimum for rules. And if I click on this recommendation, it says you have 2 rules. First rule, allow any Azure APs, and also I allow my external IP address. I must tell here if I'm okay with this. So I can say so I can create a baseline for this. I can create a baseline, and that will not be, so I can say approve it as a baseline, and I will tell to Azure, okay, I know I have multiple open, multiple rules on firewall. I made it on purpose. I understand the risk, so I want to approve it as a baseline. And so that will be okay. It will not be recommendation anymore. Let's see the next one. Minimal set of principal should be member of MasterDB role. So now I can see the reader who is also in the MasterDB. And I also can say approve or not as a baseline. Also recommendation about classification and so on. So number of recommendations, some of them highly risky, some of them medium risk, some of them they have low risk. And so it's your choice to follow them or not, but vulnerability assessment may tell you about those risks. All right, next one, threat protection. If I go here, threat protection, I can find some attacks on my database. This database that didn't have any attacks, but yesterday we attacked a different database. When I use SQL injection, I made an attack on the database. Let's see that. Look at this, SQL injection. Oh, why it doesn't show me the injection that I made yesterday? That's odd. All right, I know why. It should be here as well. So as I can see this that the database was attacked. I can see the vulnerable statement. So that was a statement that was used to attack. So that statement was vulnerable. So with advanced protection, I can find when the database under attack. Tomorrow we will explore Security Center in more details, and I will show you different type of attacks and different type of alerts that you may find in Security Center. But for database, that's that's called advanced threat protection, which is the part of Security Center for the database. All right, and now let's from the database, let's jump to actual data, and let's see how can we mask obfuscate data for the user. So when we have data in the database, what we can do, and data is sensitive, what we can do, we can obfuscate the output for non-privileged users. For example, you have in your database data like credit card numbers, email addresses, phone numbers, and so on. So sensitive values that you don't want to show to your database operators, to users who work with the application as an operator. So you want to hide the actual value. For example, when you call to the bank and and you work with operators in the bank, they don't know your card number. They know only last 4 digits to actually identify your card, but they don't know the full number. The same idea here. We will hide the values that are sensitive and only keep some numbers for identification. So let me show you this. Let me see. I should have, for cleaning database, I should have data masking for email address. Yeah, for email address. Email address. And it must show me the first letter of the email address, then @ and then domain. All right. Now let me find the actual users with the emails. But now I'm an admin. I should have full access. I should see the original values. Let's see. Yeah, I see the original values. Now let me connect to the standard user, not non-privileged user. Try to access this data as well. Unopened tables. This table is ISP users, ASP.NET users. Look at this. So now I don't see the actual value. I can see on the mask value. So the name of the data masking, or DDM, that's the way how can you hide from non-privileged users. And you may ask, wait a second, but who is privileged, who is non-privileged? How can you determine the privileged user? That's a good question. If you Google about dynamic data masking, in the description, you may find who will see actual value. So to see actual value, you must have permission called unmask. And this permission is added by default to SA, to security, to system admin, to the administrator of the database. But for other users, it must be delegated manually if you want them to see the original value. So we will not hide data from the admins, but we can hide data from actual from the end users. All right. So unmask permission will allow you to see the original values. Next one, encryption. Database itself is encrypted, so database, log files, and backups is encrypted. Oh, by the way, maybe it's not encrypted by default. Let me check. I don't remember if it's encrypted by default or not. I think no. Maybe yes. I don't remember, to be honest, by default. So, but anyway, we can encrypt or not encrypt the database backups and logs at rest. And that's called the transparent data encryption. So if somebody somehow have physical access to actual storage where you have, Microsoft employees and if they have access to storage where you have database or logs or backup, it will be encrypted there. What you can do, you may change the key for encryption to your customer managed key. So if I go to the server level and then click transparent data encryption, so by default it will use service managed key, but you may change to your customer managed key, and of course you will choose Key Vault for this. You will choose Key Vault. So transparent data encryption, that's encryption of database table and database logs and backups at rest. And it's transparent. You don't need to modify your application if you want to support this transparent data encryption. And the last one that may combine two previous technologies together. Always encrypted. That's what you used in the previous lab. So let's imagine you want to encrypt your database, but not only at rest, but also you want to encrypt it in use or in transit. So you want to hide some values not only from non-privileged users, but also from any user, even admin. So how can you do that? How can you hide sensitive data from privileged user? You may use column encryption for this, and this feature called always encrypted. So you encrypt columns, and only user who has access key, master key, may decrypt actual values. That's what you did in the previous lab when you work with Key Vault. Let me show you this. Always encrypted. If I go to the actual database and find tables, let's click on the table and here encrypt columns. All right, let's do next. I know it's so slow. Let me in parallel open Azure database. Always encrypted. And there's instruction how to configure. There's instruction how to configure your database with always encrypted. So let me show you some of the things. So you create a Key Vault first for a register application to have an ID, to have application ID. So this ID will be used to access Key Vault. You create a Key Vault. Then you connect to the SQL Server Management Studio, create a table, and you click an encrypt column and select your column. Let me do it. So now I have columns. Some of them are encrypted. And if I want to encrypt column, what I can do, I can click on the column. Let's check the box here. And I can choose encryption type. There are two type of encryption, deterministic and randomized. What's the difference between them? Deterministic, if you use the deterministic, in that case, all columns with deterministic type will be encrypted with the same encryption type, with the same encryption algorithm. So it's less secure, but it will not block you to run any operations. What you can also do, you can choose randomized. In that case, this column will be encrypted. Will use random algorithm for encryption. But in that case, you will lose an ability to run joins for this column, run indexing, and so on. So this column will not be fully support all of the operations. So if you have highly sensitive columns that you need to protect, and those columns are not, they don't need to have joins or indexing and so on, I think a full list of operations you may find in the article, then you may use the randomized. If you need to have joins and indexing, then use deterministic. So you do that. Then you must generate a master key, which will be stored in the key vault. I already have that, so look at this. So I have this key. So that's the reason why I'm showing you the article. So you generate a master key, and you did that in the previous lab. This key will be stored in the key vault. And then you choose, and then you just use this key. So I can just say deterministic, click next, click next again, and click next, and it will encrypt my column. I don't want to do that. I already have multiple columns encrypted. That's enough for me to encrypt those columns. And also, you try that. You try that in the lab previously. What is the specific of encryption? So let me just move on and look here. So it says create application that works with encrypted data. So by default, your application will not work with those data. You must add the SQL client to your this identity model client to your application to actually work with this with this encrypted data. So always encrypted, not transparent. In case of always encrypted, we must modify our application. So look here, there's everything here in the article. So you may find it here, what you can do with your application. And you did that in the lab, by the way. But the application already pre-created for you. And also you may access Key Vault from your application. You must be able to access Key Vault. So you must modify your application a bit to work with this data. After this, after you modify your application, and here's the example, then you're all set. And once again, you do it in the lab, you probably know how it looks like. So that's called always encrypted. So always encrypted, that's the way how can we encrypt data in columns, even from administrators. So nobody will have access if they don't have access to keys. All right, that's about database security. Before I ask you to do the lab, I wanna tell you about one thing that you should note, that you should note and you should keep in mind. There are a number of questions in the exam where you have similar answers but different questions. Let me show an example. Answer number 1. Azure transparent data encryption or database encryption. Check TDE is data or database data. So the first one, transparent data encryption. Second answer, dynamic data masking. Third one is let's say advanced threat protection. And the last one, always encrypted? So we have 4 answers, and we have different questions and similar answers. For example, question number 1: you need to encrypt data at rest without modifying fine, something like that, without modify your application. Which technology, which feature should you use? And for this one, it should be transparent data encryption for this question. But let me try something else. Let's say question number 2. You need to, let's say, protect data at rest, in transit, and in use, into encrypt data. Which feature you need to use? Which feature should you use in that case? So in that case, you may have the same set of answers, but the actual answer will be different. It's going to be always encrypted. So make sure you understand the difference between transparent data encryption, always encrypted, and data masking. So they really like to ask the same question and provide you the same answers. Also, by the way, what you may find is storage service encryption, which is encryption at rest for storage. That also may be one of the answers. So make sure you clearly understand the difference between TDE, that's encryption at rest for your databases and backups and logs. Data masking, DDM, which is nothing more than obfuscation. This one, say like this. Always encrypted, which is encryption at rest, in transit, and in use, but you must modify the application that will use this encryption. And storage service encryption, which is SSE, that's an encryption for storage account. So make sure you know the difference between those 4, because you may find questions, and a few questions, where you will have the same set of answers or similar set of answers, but different questions, and you must clearly understand in which case you use each technology. All right, so that's about databases, and we reached to the end of the session number 2. Let me wrap everything up. So today we covered, I would say, not super common topics. So we in the first part we covered applications and Key Vault, and in the second one we talk about blob storage and SQL databases and about their security. And also I provide you some exam tips, what you should keep in mind when you work with those features. So that was quite an interesting day from my standpoint, and some of the topics are not super common because some of them they are used more by developers. For example, Key Vault, IT pros usually don't really understand what is that, or before they study. Before they start to study the Key Vault. So, but now you know what application registrations are, what Key Vault are, and how can we configure security for storage and for databases. Now it's time to try it in the lab. And we have lab number 11 and 12. And lab number 11, we will work with SQL database. It will be a very short lab, just just you will play a bit with those features like classification and auditing. But keep in mind, you may have discrepancies between the instruction and the actual portal, because you may still have the old instruction with but now old instruction in old instruction you may have advanced data security, I think it's called. So not anymore. Now it was separated to classification and security center. Keep it in mind. So lab number 11, quite short, about databases. And lab number 12, that's about storage and service endpoints. So you will combine service endpoint and storage. The lab itself is not small, because you need to deploy virtual machine, and you will configure access only from that virtual machine using that service endpoint. So this lab will be pretty interesting, where you will play with storage access as well. So lab number 12, lab number 11. Lab number 11. Lab 11 and Lab 12. As usual, you have 1 more hour to be here and ask questions about lab if you have them. And I'm gonna mute my microphone. And before that, I'm gonna say that tomorrow we'll continue at, as usual, 9 a.m. in your local time zone. And tomorrow we'll have the operations day. Tomorrow it's going to be very, very simple. Not very, very simple. I would say tomorrow will be very, very common for non-developers, because it's operations like monitoring, Sentinel, security center. So tomorrow we'll have like a more convenient day for those who not involved in DevOps processes. So tomorrow we'll start at 9 a.m. and we'll talk about monitoring, security center, and Sentinel. So thank you very much for your participation today. Hope to see you tomorrow. Please do the lab and join tomorrow for the next study day. Thank you very much. Bye bye. See you tomorrow.
Thank you. See you.